Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I'm very, very excited to announce and welcome my next podcast guest to the show today. Welcome, Kathryn. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, good. Lovely to meet you and be here today.
Yes, I was just shocked to hear that it is actually only 6 a.m. At your time zone. If I would have known, we would have totally scheduled this podcast a little bit later to not make you wake up so early. But where are you located to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning to jump on a podcast interview?
So I'm living in New Zealand. So I live in Auckland in New Zealand.
Okay.
Down the bottom of the world.
Yeah, down the bottom.
I think we're the first country in the world to see the sun.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's much sun at the moment.
So you actually live in the future, which is so nice.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, you live in the future. And are you originally from New Zealand?
Yes. I was born in New Zealand, and I have done traveled around in a number of places around the world, but I'm back here now and I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, let's start with a quick introduction of yourself, who you are and what you've been up to over the last couple of years.
Right, who I am. So, yeah, I currently, over the last year or so, I have started up coaching, and I've called myself the Happiness at Work Coach, because I have been really fascinated by how we have fun and enjoyment and well-being at work for some time now, really over about 10 or more years. It's been a passion of mine, and I think partly because I wanting to share that with others, but I want to know as much as myself, because I have my own challenges just like anyone. So that's really been something, as I say, a passion that I've had, and I also have a background in research, so an academic background. So I've done quite a bit of research in that area and published in the area of fun and well-being and enjoyment at work. So I've been able to bring my research side together with, I sort of have a social work mentoring coaching experience as well. So I brought those two together over the years, and then more recently in a Happiness at Work coach. So that's really what I'm up to at the moment, and a short précis of what I've been doing over the last decade, I suppose.
Okay, that's really cool. Thank you so much for the quick introduction. So have you worked in research like at a university, or have you worked in companies? Like what? I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the actual background.
The actual research, yes. Well, over the last 10 or so years, it's been self-driven research through working with a colleague often who's located at a university. And I did also work myself at a university over the last 5 or so years in another capacity, and did research with her then. So that's, in terms of the research, it was really drawing on my past skills and incorporating them with the workplace wellness work I was doing. But over the about 6 years ago now, I actually did get a job in a university, and it was a role. It's kind of a mentoring role, and it was absolutely like my dream job.
Okay.
I just absolutely loved it, and wonderful team, and it was just so satisfying. And then about a year into the job, I realized that there were quite a lot of repetitive elements in the job, which we all have, often have.
Of course. Yeah.
And So sometimes I was feeling just a little bit bored, but I still love the job and I still kind of love the team. So I sort of ignored it to some extent, just because it was kind of mostly good. And then over the next couple of years, unfortunately, we were restructured a number of times and sort of lost track of how many times. And I actually burnt out a couple of times, and I think you might have had a similar experience. And I went from, loving my job, like just being so happy and, scared someone was going to take it from me, to being miserable. And I just really didn't know what to do about it. And at that time, I had started a piece of research with a colleague at the university, talking to people who claim to have had fun in any job they've ever had. And they were people who ranged from the ages in their 30s to their 60s. So there was a lot of experience. And when I actually ultimately left this job because I just couldn't work out what to do to turn it back into a job I loved, it was quite unfortunate. I looked at this data, and because I wanted to see what were the secrets of these people who always had fun at their jobs, because I had loved my job and I wanted to still have fun there, but it had changed. So I took a good look at that research, and because, as I say, I wanted to know their secrets. And that's really when I started to think, oh, wow, have a look at what they know and wanting to share it with others through the coaching. And I guess, I don't know if you want to know their secret.
Yes, no, well, so the first thing that I would love to know is what was your own realization? Like what happened from like you loving your job and then, really kind of really disliking it? So what happened in that period of time? What do you think brought you to burnout?
Yes. Yeah, because it's interesting, burnout, isn't it? Because I think that I'd always thought of it as being a workload issue. You think, oh, someone's just got so much work to do and they're so busy, and obviously then their body and their mind is overloaded, for me, it wasn't so much that. It was, I think, going from an environment where, as I said before, the team was really great. It was a very great team environment. And during the first year, and then when the restructures began, I was moved from my team, which had been, I think, about, I don't know, up to 15 people, to just the two of us. And that shift, and I was also in a location physically away from a lot of people. And the workload did increase to some extent, but I'm quite an efficient person. So rather than working longer hours, I just kind of crammed more into the time I had. And so I was having less breaks and less social time with colleagues, even a quick lunch, just a quick lunch and then back to the students. And being isolated from the team that I had felt was very supportive, both socially and professionally. That was really what the burnout was, I think. Just that I became quite isolated, lonely without that support. And also at the time, I'd had a new manager and they didn't necessarily understand what I and my colleague did. And so we didn't sort of have that guidance as well. So I think it was being without the guidance and being isolated for me.
Yeah.
Which,
made a big difference in how you were feeling about your job. Yeah. And so now that you're looking back at this, I think you eventually left that job in order to become a coach, or was there other reasons why you left the job?
It was really a reactive rather than a proactive move. I had, as I said, I was feeling miserable, had loved it, was feeling miserable. And I had an idea that there was something I could do potentially to stay. And it was in an organization where potentially there might have been a lot of opportunities. And I sort of looked around for support there. I I did talk to a few people. I sort of looked to management, but I feel that the managers at the time were sort of perhaps just as confused as me about what was going on in the changes. So I didn't feel like I could get too much guidance from them. And I actually did a program. I did a women in leadership program through the institution at that time, and to see whether I could get some guidance there. And it was quite good. It gave me added confidence, but I felt like I wasn't learning the skills, or, I felt there were some practical skills maybe I needed to turn my job around, but I just didn't know what they were. And so ultimately I just didn't know what to do. And that's why I made the decision to leave, because I was feeling miserable and I wanted to stop feeling miserable, but I really didn't know where I was going. I left.
Yeah.
And thankfully I was privileged enough at that time to have the opportunity to take a bit of a break with my family situation. My husband was working, and so I decided to actually studied a language for half a year.
Wow.
Just to do something different.
Yeah. Which language did you study?
Well, it's the Māori language, so that's the indigenous language of New Zealand. Yes, which is becoming more popular again, and I'd always wanted to learn. I had some of the language, but I wanted to do more.
Cool.
So it was wonderful. So I know you're a linguist. You're probably much more of a linguist than myself. Yeah. So
yeah, I love languages.
Yeah. So that was great. And then after that, it was like, okay, what now? And that was when I really took a look at this research and really trying to make sense of the experience I'd had. I'd left this job that I'd loved. What had gone on there? Why did that happen? Why did it have to happen? And took a look at this research and started to read as well a lot around what other people had written about how to enjoy work, what to do when things went wrong, and so forth. And started to formulate perhaps what I could have done if I'd known these things then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So start telling us a little bit more about that. I'm very curious to hear kind of the findings that you had in terms of workplace happiness. Like, what do we need to do? I'm sure that a lot of people are listening right now and they're like, oh yeah, I can totally relate to this. Like, I got this job, I really loved it at the beginning, and then I just really quickly burned out, or things changed really quickly from a reorganization perspective, and like my responsibilities maybe changed, my team changed, my manager changed, and the job that I initially really signed up for is not really the same anymore. And how can they find workplace happiness again when they're finding themselves in that situation?
Yes, it is very, very common. And well, what I found when I looked at the research from these people that I mentioned that seem very skilled at, in the research we called it having fun, but we could call it enjoyment or well-being, was that they seem to have a kind of inherent sense of hope about them. I guess optimism, that something could always be done. So it wasn't that nothing bad ever happened in their jobs, or that there were never any problems which might impact their enjoyment of work, but they just seem to have this inherent hope that something could be done. And when I first asked them what I was interested in, the strategies, they weren't so much able to say what they did, because to them it just seemed normal to enjoy their work. But when I sort of questioned, we did quite long interviews, I questioned them more deeply, it did become apparent that yes, they did do things, they did implement strategies, but for them it was almost habitual, so they just didn't know they did it, you know what I mean? So for example, it could be something quite simple. One woman, she was just explaining that when she was working in the office, and when she got a little bit cranky, she got a bit tired, she would regularly go for a walk around the block. So very simple action, but something that she would do, it was kind of habitual perhaps, and she had other little strategies she used. She had an email folder, so when students or colleagues sent her an email that was complimentary or thanking her for something. She put it in a little folder in her inbox, and when she was feeling a bit down, she'd open that folder and read them, things like that. So it's like little things, just but then it could be little things, but then it could be something much bigger. So somebody he was a team leader in an engineering workshop, so he had quite big projects. He might have to travel to do a project, take some big machinery with him, that sort of thing. And so he just said he really organized himself well. He really, really planned well. So he knew from experience that was how he was going to enjoy that job. Somebody else might have issues with something going on at work around boundaries in terms of their workload. And so they knew that they actually needed to prepare for a fairly, a good conversation with their manager, which often we get nervous about those sorts of things, talking to our managers. But, so for him, that might have been a bigger deal, but it was something that was really important. So, yeah, really taking action. And which seems very simple, but I think what I've found for myself and also clients that I've worked with, which is when we are feeling unhappy, miserable at work, we often feel very stuck. Yeah, and we don't know where to move. And so it's really helping shift people to feel that we have some power.
Yeah, and I think we get stuck in that thought pattern cycle as well. Like we identify something that we're unhappy with, and then we kind of support that unhappiness with, obviously our own thoughts, but then maybe we might also talk with other people about it, and we might start to complain about the things that are not going well. And then we just kind of reinforce those feelings and those thoughts that we're already having. And we're going kind of down that rabbit hole that is hard to get out of. So I love that you're saying that we need to take action. And another thing, I love the example of that woman that, if she would start to feel like tired or cranky, she would just get up and walk around the block. Something so simple. And yet I think not a lot of us are actually doing that we have that awareness of stopping and being like, oh, like I'm actually getting this signal from my body right now because I'm probably exhausted and tired, and I just need to do something else in order to boost my energy level. So I'm taking really that conscious step to walk outside and do something for myself. I think that's so powerful. Wow, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's that pausing and just noticing what's going on. And yes, I agree. I think we do tend to push on. One thing I know for myself when I was going through that situation, I think others too, when that's a small example, I suppose, when we're feeling a bit tired and cranky, we might just keep pushing on. Oh, just got to get my work done. I've got,
or we're getting a cup of coffee. Right?
Yeah, that's right. But it can also be, it can also be when we realize maybe, I'm miserable at work, things have got to that point, and we push on. Kind of, I was like that. I was like, oh, I know I'm not happy, but I've got to be positive in the sense of, I kind of had this persona, like, I don't think anybody else around me knew that's how I was feeling, because I thought I've just got to present as happy and friendly, and being positive is a good thing. And I guess I thought that it would change something, but I guess what I say to people is, yes, being positive is a great thing. And obviously those people in my research, they were good at being positive, but you also have to recognize where you're at as to start with. I think, actually, Kathryn, you're feeling quite miserable. Maybe you need to take a weekend out to consider what's going on here, think this through, or as you say, have some really good conversations with people. Just stop first.
I think a lot of people, what comes up for me when you say that is, I feel like a lot of people are almost afraid to look at that and to like take that status quo and be like, okay, what is actually really going on? Like, I think self-reflection and personal development is sometimes also something that's uncomfortable, and that brings up things that we need to change. And obviously change oftentimes seems very scary. And so I think, when I have conversations with my clients, people oftentimes say, I just ignored the signals of being super stressed and burned out because I was afraid to look at the real answer of what was actually going on.
Oh, very interesting. Yes. And do you think I sense with my own situation, I think I just didn't know also how to get the assistance I needed or where to go. So if I faced it, it was part of, well, what were the solutions? And I said I was sort of looking for them. And I guess for me, that's why I decided to move into the coaching, because I wanted to provide a solution for people who'd been in a similar situation. Because I think from my particular work that I do, which is very specific to the workplace, and I'm have quite a practical approach, because I felt like that's what I needed back then. I didn't find that. I didn't find someone who could help me work through those steps practically. Yeah. And so I suppose I didn't want to face it in a way either. I was sort of trying to find, but yes.
I think, that's really interesting you say that. I think that people only look for a coach when they already have that realization that something is not going well, right? I feel like, again, that even that part already requires the first step of building that awareness. So if we don't have the awareness, we are not gonna start looking at what we can do or how somebody else can help us, right? And what I found was interesting as well, what you were saying earlier, describing your situation and how you went through that job that had a lot of changes. And, you were saying the team wasn't there anymore. You felt isolated, your guidance, the guidance from the new manager wasn't really clear. I think that's all interesting points, right? But then it's always about those external circumstances and the perception and the evaluation of what we make of that, right? And I'm sure that today, okay, all of these external circumstances happened, but I still had power and control over that, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Yes, I did. They were external, and I'd had this feeling in myself that there was something I could do, but I didn't quite know what to do. And I think that, yes, you do tend to, you're feeling disempowered. And I think too, in a workplace situation, we often associate power with, the management, the powers that be. It just, or external to ourselves, the organization. And so we don't see ourselves as having power. And looking back at certain situations, I can see that there were actions I could have taken, retrospectively, if I had known what actions I might have taken. But at the time, as you say, you can feel very stuck.
Yeah, and I think when you feel really stuck, sometimes what really helps is what you actually mentioned earlier, to just take a weekend or take a day and be like, okay, what is actually going on, right? To pause and to take that power back, right? Because we feel disempowered because we're making all of these other people responsible for how we feel. But when we can have that awareness of, okay, this is what's happening, right? Somebody's listening right now, and you might feel exactly that way. Just you're listening to that, and maybe that resonates already, and you're like, okay, maybe I just need to take a day or a weekend and to just really reflect on that consciously. What do I have? What do I really enjoy? What is missing? What would I like to do? And then also become aware around what is in my control of these items that I just wrote down, and what is outside of my control, right? Because I think we can all relate that, working for an organization or being an employee somewhere is brings its own challenges, but you obviously made that choice for a reason, why you are an employee, why you are working for this organization. And it's a good question to ask yourself, does this really fulfill me, or what else would fulfill me? And will I be able to find that within the organization, or maybe do I need to look elsewhere to find that fulfillment?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, very much so, taking that time to consider those questions, and that we can, and it's okay, and that's a process that and I suppose what
Absolutely.
and we can do that, and we can do that on our own, and we can do that with somebody else. And I suppose with my coaching, that's what I tried to do, is to provide what I aim to do, is to provide someone to work those steps through with, when we're unsure. But there are also lots of books and processes. It's just that the act of pausing is very powerful, which I think, as you say, it's right.
Yeah, I love that
And
you're saying it's a process, for sure. Because you
yeah,
said you stayed in your job for like 5 years still, right? Even though you loved it the first year, and then it kind of started to break down or fall
yeah.
apart.
Yes, I think it was 3 years in total. Yes,
3
but
years.
that's right. It's a process. You don't know it's happening, and I think this what we're talking about is being aware and being mindful of when things are perhaps not going so well, and pausing can start much earlier. And I think when I look back, and I said to myself, oh, after the first year, I was starting to feel a bit bored at times. But I kind of ignored it because I still loved the job and I loved the team. So that was in some ways the beginning, of being some challenges to my work enjoyment. And at that point, I think if I'd had the awareness I have now, you hope so in retrospect, then I would have been able to pause and say, okay, I'm feeling a bit bored. And personally, I do have quite a high need for challenge. So I have a low or high boredom threshold. So I can get bored fairly easily. So if I was getting bored then, it's not going to go away. It was only going to get worse. So actually having been able to pause at that point, right back then, and explore that as what I might do to increase challenge in my role, and I could have done that. But I ignored it. So learning to pause, even if we love our job, we're not going to always have great
I
days or
love that
weeks.
point too. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what's also important to notice is that we all go through fluctuations of liking the job and not liking the job. I remember the first time as an entrepreneur going through a phase of, I'm not super inspired and motivated right now on the things that I'm working on. And I had a conversation with my mom about it. And she was like, it's okay. She's like, you don't always have to love your job at all times. We're all going through phases where we are maybe, where other things in our life are happening. And we just need to be okay with that as well, because it's just a phase, hopefully, right? If it is just a phase, it will come back. And if it doesn't, then you can, ask yourself some more deeper questions. But I think, we don't always have to be immediately looking at things when things are not going the way we want them to go, because sometimes it's just a moment, and we don't need to over analyze everything, right? Because I think as peak performers, we also a little bit tend to do that. And obviously from a evolutionary perspective, we jump at the things that are not going well, and we dwell on these things. So I think a big learning for myself was to be like, okay, I'm noticing that this is happening right now, but I'm not going to overanalyze it or over criticize it, and think that I need to completely change my profession now, or my career path, just because I'm not feeling it for a few weeks.
Very interesting, really interesting point. Yeah, that is interesting. That point about how we can dwell. So I noticed that we can do, as I said earlier, when I was feeling miserable, one of the things I was doing was trying to be really positive and just push forward. But the other thing I think we can do is we can dwell on the bad things that are happening, or our sad emotions or our frustrated emotions. We can dwell on that, and yes, and it becomes this big thing. And also it can become, particularly in a workplace environment when there's restructures and changes, it can become a great topic of conversation amongst colleagues, to have a good moan about things and a good complain. And I used to, meet with the colleague who was my little team, in my team of two, and we would, have a good sort of a bit of a moan and a laugh about all the things that were going on. in a way that was probably not ultimately that positive, but it was a bit of a way of venting. But I think, we can dwell too much on that as well, and it's not too constructive.
Mhm.
It's not very
Yeah, for
constructive.
sure. Yeah. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about the factors of, the happiness at work. I would love to talk a little bit more about the research findings and even maybe the research that you did on that, in order to really get really clear on what people can do and integrate into their day-to-day to find happiness at work on a regular basis.
Yeah, sure. So there were a range of strategies that people used. So I can talk to some of them. In a way, that they are strategies that we know, a lot of us know about anyway, some of them, but as we've talked about, we don't always stop and consciously do them. But one of the first ones that I could talk about, which is because I've often use this when I start with clients, is to have a think about think about the challenges, but then that we're having, and then think about, well, what would we like to be different, which we've already talked about, but having that time to think about what would we like to be different. And often when something is really bothering us at work and it's lasted for a while, that feeling, it's because the priorities that we hold personally at that time in our life, or the values, if you like, there's been compromised to some extent. And I think we all have a whole load of values that we hold, but there are certain values that might be more important at that time, or particularly if there's a challenge or issue that comes up around them. And so really identifying what that priority for us might be, and then looking at ways to work with that. I'll give you an example of one of the people in the research. She was working in the university, actually, and so she was working in a research capacity, and so sometimes it was kind of a bit dry and stuffy and that sort of thing. But and that could be frustrating for her. And one of the ways that she really wanted to experience her work and herself was to be creative. She saw herself as being quite a creative person, and so she would bring. She did do art actually at home, and so she would bring that and display that in her office so that she could see that. And she would do things like she would go out and buy herself a whole bunch of coloured markers. And so when she was, marking student work or whatever she was doing, she would use these fluorescent colours and, just to feel a bit more creative, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's just an example of how finding ways to kind of align your work, your tasks that you may have to do, but with what's important to you as well. Yes. Yeah. So that was one of.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. So that was one of the keys that came through. Just thinking. Other important aspects were just things that we know about too is around boundaries with workload, and also who we might associate with more. So, for example, around workload, I felt that the people in my sample seemed to be relatively clear about the tasks that were theirs to do, and be prepared, if necessary, to have conversations, or to say, it's learning to say no if necessary, but in positive ways. So all of the people were quite, seemed to hold good relationships with their colleagues as a high priority, but also that requires communication skills. And so being prepared to have conversations with colleagues around, say, and management around workloads and that sort of thing, which is not something that we necessarily find easy. And we were saying before that sometimes it's easier to sort of stick with the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think that's a characteristic of us as humans. We tend to kind of be a bit risk averse in that way. We know the status quo, and we don't necessarily want to risk shifting it, even if it might improve or it might not.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that, I guess, communication. But these people seem to have this inherent sense that, you know, something could be done, and that, you know, they could, you know, some of them spoke about this, that they could speak about these things in constructive, positive ways with people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting point as well. I think workload and boundaries is a very interesting topic, because I feel like, especially when people start at a new job, I get that a lot, that people tell me, but I just started this role, I just started in this company, and I just want to show them that they hired me for a reason and that it was worth hiring me, right? And so they take on all this workload, even though they start to feel overwhelmed, but they have a hard time saying no, because they want to show off, like they want to, you know, they want to make sure that they show themselves from their best side. And I am always like, well, you don't really show yourself from your best side if you just take on everything and you're feeling overwhelmed, and then you are burning yourself out, you're working yourself to the ground, and then what are you going to show? You know, that you're not capable of managing your own work-life balance in order to make sure that you are actually showing your best at work. So I think when we are talking about workload and boundaries, I think it's important to keep that in mind when if you tend to be a person that always says yes to everything, because it's great, and maybe you are super interested in all of these different things. Maybe you're a rainbow, a multifaceted person and love all of these different areas. But I think from my own experience, I've tended to always say yes to a lot of things, because I was always curious and interested in a lot of things, but it actually left me frustrated at the end, because I felt like I couldn't really finish and do anything properly, because I had so many, you know, I had so many of my interests kind of being dispersed across the time that I had, and it was just not qualitatively as I wanted it to be at the end.
That's interesting. Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. Often, I mean, in a way, it's a great quality to have, to be interested in.
Exactly.
But it's interest. But yes, as you say, you're human and you can only do so much. And it was interesting that you said ultimately you felt frustrated because you couldn't do quality work. And I think sometimes when I work with clients, you know, that might be for them, there's perhaps a value there, that, you know, that value of wanting to do quality work. And so perhaps, say identifying something like that would help guide us as to whether to say yes or no. If we, you know, if I take this job on, will I be able to do this other task on? Will I be able to do a quality job? Because the quality work is actually my priority at the moment, you know, to do a good job. So it's kind of it is hard, isn't it? And so I think it's good to identify some kind of criteria we might have around what we say yes or no to ultimately.
I love that idea. So if you look back, what would you tell your 5 or 10 year younger self? Like what kind of advice would you give her?
Yeah, well, I would say I definitely would encourage her to be hopeful, particularly in that job, that something could be done, and that her intuition that something could be done was correct. And perhaps persist a little bit more in trying to find perhaps someone to guide her. Maybe me. Or someone like me. Obviously it couldn't be me, but that's kind of why I do what I do. But yes, that there are people out there that can guide if that's what you feel you need. So some of us might become equipped in our own way, depending on where we're at. And certainly I think I could have perhaps looked around and read a few more books and that sort of thing. But I think personally at that time I probably needed someone to walk through this journey with, who would just help to go, yep, you can do this. So perhaps just looking around a little bit more and trying to find that help that is out there. I think if you if you look.
Yeah, for sure. Kathryn, how can people best find more information about you?
Well, I do have on my website, I do have a free PDF that people can get. I outline in there the 3 steps to enjoying any job better. So got some good tips there. So that's on my website, which is www.happinessatworkcoach.com. www.happinessatworkcoach.com. So yeah, you can register for that there.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and I hope that people already learned a couple of different tools and techniques and insights into what they can do in order to find more happiness at work. So thank you so much, and I wish you a really wonderful start of your day.
Oh, thanks, Julia. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been a blessing, and enjoy the rest of your day too, and the listeners as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.